Do you feel as though there is no hope for your marriage? Do you think that your spouse doesn't understand you? Well, Dr. Donald Welsh is going to answer these questions and so much more coming right up. And you refer to expectations as relationship killers, and that is so true. And I've heard this before. What's your take?
Expectations are so incredibly important. Let me illustrate it if I may, that one of the first things that we must do in a healthy marriage is to discuss what are our domestic responsibilities. In other words, what are our expectations in the marriage? I had one couple, Nancy, this truly happened. This couple had been married, I think, 45 years. They were mature in age and mature in their marriage in the sense of longevity, about 40 to 45 years. And we begin to talk about expectations. And I said, hey, can you tell me, let's talk a little bit about your expectations. So, for example, how did you early on in your marriage decide who would do what? Domestic responsibility, who would take out the trash, who might wash the car, who would take the dog or get the cleaning done, or whatever might be. And they both looked at each other and said, I don't know that we've ever done that. And this expectation concept is very important. And so I said, well, tell me about that. Would you mind? And she said, I love taking out the trash, but I've never been able to take out the trash because my husband has done it our entire marriage, these 40 or 45 years. He actually stood up, turned to her and raised his hands and said, are you kidding me? I hate taking out the trash. You love taking out the trash. Why didn't we figure this out early on in our marriage? But it was a good moment to say, hey, we need to talk about expectations because
Yeah.
oftentimes our expectations come from our family of origin. And that means if we did it this way, we do it that way in a marriage. One common way, after all these years, I've heard this many times where a couple will say, well, my expectation is that we rinse the dishes and then put them in the sink. And then in the morning, we put them in the dishwasher. And the other person in the marriage says, no way. My family, we had to clear the dishes, rinse the dishes, wash the dishes, actually in the dishwasher before we went to bed. And if those expectations are not expressed, people will begin to be disruptive.
Mm.
They'll have anxiety with each other.
Yeah.
Um, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. I
Yeah.
know one of the things that when my wife and I were first married, we were in service at our church that first Sunday, and I whispered over, "Oh, honey, did you happen to write the check for our tithe?" This kind of ages me, where you might write a check and put it in the offering. And she said, "Oh, I forgot, but I'll write it right now." And so my expectation with the ushers coming it would be written very quickly because I do things too quickly. In fact, my signature is not readable, and she's very methodical. And so methodically, she was writing the check, and I got more anxious and more anxious. I was looking to my left, seeing the ushers coming down the aisle to take our offering. My expectation was that it would be done quickly, and hers was methodically. And finally, we got it in the plate, and I had a lot of anxiety, and I thought to myself, if I don't appreciate the differences in my wife rather than my own expectations, we're going to be in trouble. And so that can happen to a couple because we're actually attracted to the opposite uh,
Yeah.
in so many ways. And so we need to learn to respect. So those expectations and how we might see our mate are really important.
Yes, very important. And so, when you're talking about all this, it's also listening skills, right?
Yes,
Listening skills is like giving someone your companion air, you say.
yes, yes. A way to think about that is I use AIR, AIR, as an acronym to help people remember the essential elements of active listening. And these are the A is for affirm, the I is inquire, and then the third is reflect or repeat. All of these enhance empathy.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, if we default, like I mentioned a few moments ago, Nancy, into a business relationship, actually empathy is kind of no longer available as much. So that affirming, inquiring, and reflecting or repeating back, that's validating the other person, which actually increases empathy. And so when one intentionally does all three of these actions while they're listening to another, it's like giving, and you said this, oxygen to the one who has been underwater or without air for a bit of time. It brings refreshment and relief to the person who is listened to in this way.
I'm hoping that my audience out there is really, sucking this in, because there's some people out there that they want to know, like, how do I do this? How am I going about this? And so you're answering so many great questions. So, the kind of crazy thing is, you say that most men have no clue what they feel. How does that impact their marriage?
Yes, this is a tough one that I just finished a session where we were talking about this. That when we think of men, that our brains are very different from females, and our feelings, even though we feel, they are very different. So most men are typically not taught to understand their feelings or how to express them in healthy ways. So with the testosterone wash that happens very early for a little boy, and the estrogen wash that happens very early for a little girl, those are two neurotransmitters that change, make a little boy and a little girl very different. Is that the testosterone wash causes an inability or lessens the ability for a male to actually be able to go between the two hemispheres. So we think, if I can think in terms of the left being more of my thinking area, my right more of my emotional, is that what happens is we don't go between the two hemispheres very quickly. Deborah Tannen is a famous linguist from Harvard University. It talks about some of these differences. So, in many cases, the only feeling men feel comfortable with is anger. Hollywood has made billions of dollars on movies of, the villain comes in, steals his children and wife, and the whole movie is going after the villain, and men are getting their anger out. Yeah, go get him, get your family back. But since women are relators, they generally speak in the language of feelings, while men speak in the language of facts. So if a man doesn't know the language of feelings at all, when he gets married, it's as if he's traveled to a foreign country without any attempt to learn the language of the country. Eventually, eventually, this will create significant conflict in the marriage, since the man will be reporting more and more facts to try
Yeah.
and convince his wife that he's right. I heard someone ask one day, "Do you want to be right or do you want to be married?" Because you probably want to be able to do both. So, to create intimacy, and I talk about this in the book, Nancy, to create intimacy in the marriage, the man needs to learn to get out of his head and into his heart. That's tough. I'm male. I'm a male man, and I have worked on this and worked on this. I don't think that I've arrived, but we just tend to want to get things done, right? This dates me a bit, but Barney Five. This might some of my young couples. They'll say, "Oh, I watched something Barney Five was a police officer. This was black and white TV that I
Oh,
remember."
yeah.
He was talking to a woman, and she was explaining what was happening, and finally he looked at her after she had lots of words of feeling. He said, "Ma'am, just the facts, just give me the facts, ma'am." So that idea that we as men are so different. So in the book I provide a very practical and simple way for the husband and the couple to start using the language of feelings more.
Why do you encourage couples to establish relationship
Right.
goals?
So understanding a person's purpose and their dreams, their thoughts, this should go on throughout life, because in seasons of life, Nancy, we see that people, their dreams and their purposes may even change. So we must keep that alive within
Mm.
the marriage. But it's so
Yeah.
important to really listen carefully, be curious. In fact, to me, I share with lots of couples that curiosity is your best friend. Because when you're curious with your mate, you're trying to again understand, where are they today? Because I think it was once said, I don't know if it was Heraclitus, but you never put your foot in the same river twice. The
Mm.
concept, if it's moving, it's always different and unique. And so are humans. We're always in process. The
Yeah.
beauty of becoming more like Christ, as the
Yeah.
Bible says.
Yes. And my biggest thing is, you just continue to pray for your marriage as well.
Oh, absolutely. I know we talk about the gift of prayer. When I invite couples that are troubled or they're finding difficulty between themselves and the other person, their their mate, that what can happen is when you actually find time to pray for them, we begin to see our mate through the eyes of God. He
Yeah.
created that mate. He knows how we should respond rather than react to that mate. So that's really important, that gift of prayer. You know, the
Yes.
St. Paul once said that we should never pray without ceasing. So even as we breathe, we can't continue to live unless we're constantly breathing, that we have this constant way of praying for a mate. God, give me, the ability to see my precious wife and to understand her gifts, her abilities.
Yeah. I
Yes.
thought this question was very interesting. Why do you say that Satan hates marital sex?
Mm, yes, that that is a big one. That is a big one because Genesis, Nancy, I believe, makes it very clear that we bear the image of God in our gender and by extension, our sexuality. So when we think of this, his image includes really both male and female attributes. But when a husband and wife become one during sexual intercourse, they merge the male attributes together with the female attributes, thereby depicting the fuller image of God.
Mhm.
And so Satan hates this picture and therefore does everything he can to mar it and distort it. This is why sex is at the same time so beautiful and so prone to tragedy. We see this attack on marriages, and actually, it's one of the reasons why I created the institute just a few years ago. I run a counseling center full time, and then created the Welch Therapy Institute to try to help the local church with marriages. So we offer 30 videos. We offer an assessment tool. We offer this book. And we even help people to know how to do a small group in the local church because I believe that it's the marriage that is attacked. It's God who created marriage. The first wedding, and God talks about us being his bride. And
Mhm.
Ephesians 5 helps us to see that a male should lay down his life for his bride. In other words, we should treat our wives in a very special way as Christ treats his church, the called out ones, the ecclesia. So I believe it's really God's image that's being torn here in the midst of this.
Hmm. It's funny. Satan does have a foothold in that, in the way that, maybe a husband or wife is they're yelling at each other, belittling each other, and then the other one's expecting to be having sex, and it's not not something that's going to happen, right?
No, and you're making a very good point. Sometimes a male will actually be verbal like that, and then he's okay, but she's not
Exactly.
because she's first needing to connect emotionally. And so now it's just been torn. So that's why having, when we talk about this idea of intercourse, have emotional intercourse. And that is treating your wife with love and respect. Now, I'm not just beating up on men. I'm not trying to do that whatsoever, but I am a male, so it's more easily for me to understand my own level of maleness. But it's very difficult when even something is said harshly. A male might not know that he's doing that. That's why it's so important for couples to be able to stop and say, would you please be willing to maybe smile a little more or lower your voice or even soften your voice? I've heard that so many times, particularly from females, not necessarily males. So it's
Mhm.
good advice for those of us as males to soften our approach to our wives.
Absolutely. I love it. Well said. What would you say to someone who believes there is no hope for their marriage?
Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry if there is someone that is listening and you're experiencing that. That is your experience. I'm so saddened by that for you. And I certainly understand and empathize with this sense of hopelessness. I see it a lot in my practice with the precious people I'm privileged to come alongside of. But I've seen it hundreds of times on the first day a couple enters my counseling office and announces they are ready for divorce. That's a painful moment. But I've also seen many of these same couples, Nancy, transform their nearly deceased marriages into stunningly beautiful unions. It's never easy. there's lots of work involved and lots of Jesus's his restorative power needed. But I've witnessed firsthand, however, how the principles and practices I lay out in the book have brought healing and wholeness to seemingly hopeless marriages. It's really built on biblical concepts. There's about 80 verses in scripture found in this science-backed book and biblically led book. But the only way I can explain this is to point to the God of all hope, who is described in Romans 4:17 as giving life to the dead and calling things into existence that do not exist.
Here's the book, The Responsive Marriage, Finding the Path Out of Reactivity. How would they find out more about the book and you?
Go to Amazon.com. If you'd like to contact me, I do have the website, the Welch Therapy Institute.com.
So what would you like to leave my audience with today?
That the freedom to choose to respond rather than react is a gift of being human. But love only exists where choice is present. So when choice is eliminated, so is intimacy. So in the book, we talk about this idea, the freedom to choose rather than react. Well, this is kind of a nerdy illustration that I use with my university students. But when we talk about this idea of choice, it's so important because God gives us this ability to choice. So I use the illustration. I say, okay, my students, I said, so I call my wife. And when I call her, I said, oh, hi, hon. Hey, do you have a moment to talk? Notice how I'm offering choice. And she says, oh, honey, I can't talk right now. I'm doing this. Actually, she runs our institution. So she's the COO. And so I have to be good because she can fire me at will. But the concept, she says, no, I don't have a moment to talk, but I can talk in 2 hours. And I said, oh, no, 2 hours. I'll be in a session and with a client. And then how about 3 hours? And then one of my students will pop up and say, Prof, what in the world are you doing? You're just wasting time. Why don't you just ask your question of her? And I said, well, let's start there. The idea of choice is we allow the other person to have full choice as we allow ourselves to have full choice. And that choice is so important for creating freedom in a marriage. And so love only exists where choice is present. And when choice is eliminated, so is intimacy.
Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts on our conversation and visit the website, The Call with Nancy Sabato, to learn more about me and what we do here in this ministry. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this video. Your support means a lot to us.
What sound is heard only by the heart? It is the call. Follow God. The still small voice He imparts lives in the call. Follow God to help those in need, those in want, the purpose of the call of God to share His love is where